Yes.
Okay, let's see how we're doing. Should have just switched over. Okay, I think everything looks good so far. Let me bring you guys a little bit closer. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? So, hilariously, the book notes that I tried to export says, "Note, you have reached the export limit set by the book's publisher. Some highlights are not included." And I cannot see any.
Well, you can get your highlights on your device. If you,
I
go, if you go
don't...
to the book, you can go to the little highlight section and it'll let you page through them.
Let me... I don't think I am... Let me see. I don't think I'm connected to the Kindle on the phone.
Oh, okay.
No, because I'd have to log into your account.
Okay, do you want me to, where's your, you know where your Kindle is? Do you want me to go?
It's really low battery.
Okay.
I think the phone would be better if
Okay.
Sir can input that. I think that would be easiest. I did not realize that apparently I have feelings about this book, by the way, guys, and this is just like the icing on the cake. The fact that the author doesn't let you export any notes is hilarious to me. I don't know if anybody else who read this book has also exported notes and maybe they found success, but I at least did not. What the fuck is the majestic painting? So quick story time. I saw this painting while I was out to dinner, and it's like this little cafe that serves sort of like lunch and like light dinner items, and they have featured artists that change it through the months, like once every 2 months or something, and they have a bunch of paintings, and this one was hanging above the mantle on the fireplace of that establishment. And as you can see, you know, me with my potato after work on a Friday face, you can visualize that this may look similar to me. And I mean, the corset, the kind of gothic setting, the wolf, I mean, the symbolism was all there. And I took a picture and I sent it to a couple of my friends and I was like, this is crazy. I just like found this painting. It's totally like me. It was like having that experience where like, I don't know if anybody remembers this or like would get this reference, but sometimes like people have found photos of like, Nicolas Cage from like the 1800s, right? They're like, it's a photo of Nicolas Cage from the 1800s because they find somebody who like looks really similar to him in like an old photograph. And this was kind of like that. And this was probably late June when I saw this. And last weekend when I was visiting with some friends, we went to go and, thank you sir, they went to go and watch a movie, and this is right after I got my wisdom teeth taken out. I think it was Sunday night, right? It was Sunday night.
Yeah, it was Sunday night.
Sunday night.
We were originally thinking that'd be right before you left.
Yeah, and I got my wisdom teeth out on Friday, so on Sunday I was feeling a little bit better, and we went to go watch this movie. We watched Gosford Park, which is a great movie about service and about sort of Edwardian interwar period high society English households. And this fucking painting was behind me the entire time we were watching the movie, and I never noticed because, but I don't know if it was just the pain or all of the medication I was taking. I was not taking like a heavy duty painkiller. I wasn't on anything like opioid related. I was just taking Advil. But I did not notice this for the entire fucking movie. It was just hanging up behind me. And meanwhile, like, a group of 4 of my friends, and Mr. Tex included, are all there, like, apparently having taken bets on when I would notice the fact that the painting was right behind me the entire time we were watching the movie. Long story short, this is a print of the painting that I saw in the cafe, and it was my birthday gift. And I started crying when I finally saw it. I think it was after I went to go get water or like something, and I finally like noticed it. I was like, what? I don't know why I didn't register it was there, because there was a painting that was used to be hung in the same spot, but it was a very dark painting, like it didn't have any white on the canvas, so I didn't really notice it, which was interesting. Anyways, that's the story of this painting, and hopefully at some point in time when I'm able to set up like a proper space to do live streams in and film videos in, not just fucking on a beanbag next to like a cluster of like random articles of stuff in the living room. This will be hung up in the background, along with some other things that I've sort of collected that I've wanted to have in the background. So that's the story of this painting, and I thought it was pretty good. So anyways, let us discuss what this is, because I know there are a lot of you who are new here, a lot of you who maybe didn't watch the first one. So this is the second time we're doing this, so we're kind of sort of refining what we did last time and kind of hopefully had a little bit of practice at the process. Basically what this is thanks to a goal that we have met on Patreon. Once a month we have a BDSM book club meeting, and that means that we will be reading one book every month, and I will post discussion questions for us to talk about during this sort of meeting, and you guys get to come on through the Discord chat. There is a link to it down below. If you join that and you go to the book club waiting room and you hop on the voice chat, which is the book club waiting room, we will be able to ask and respond to questions and kind of have a discussion about the book, parts that we liked, parts that we didn't like, just kind of having an ongoing dialogue about the book. And I know because so many of you, are interested in getting started in reading BDSM literature, but don't know where to start, or maybe you really just like reading books and you like having a place to discuss them. And I get a lot of questions from people who are like, what's a good book to read? And I have a list of books that I've read and books that I want to read that has like hundreds of books, pretty much all of them in Kindle ebook format, that I want to go over and discuss with you all, and that I want to read from my own personal knowledge. And last time we read Conquer Me by Casey Cunningham, which is a book about submission and being a submissive by a submissive. And that was one I'd already read before. I wanted to do something where I was already familiar with the material, so that wouldn't be like a complicating factor to the discussion. And now we are reading a book and discussing a book that I have not read before and that I didn't really know what to think about exactly. And that is BDSM 101 by Reverend Jen. Now, there are a lot of BDSM 101 books out there. Most books about BDSM are 101 books. And this is one that, again, had not read before. And I've read a few of the ones that are older. In particular, I do really like the ones, the new topping book and the new bottoming book. They're not explicitly labeled BDSM 101, but that's functionally what they are, and I think those are a good place to start. But this one was a little bit newer, and I was hoping maybe there would be some more updates, because the community has changed so much in terms of how people meet each other, how they interact in the last 5 to 10 years, that if you're interested in getting started in the community and you want advice explicitly about that as a new person, it is so hard to keep up with books that are harder than 5 to 10 years old, because a lot of them talk about things like email lists and magazine ads and newspaper clippings and things that, you know, are not really a big part of the community. I am sure, especially for certain subgroups, people who are maybe into the Gorian lifestyle, for example, things like email lists and group emails and chat rooms are probably still very much part of the way that they connect, but definitely not so much that way anymore. So that is why I picked this particular book. If you have read the book and you want to be part of the discussion, again, the link to join the Discord chat is down below. And let me actually just make sure that that link works while I think about it. I think it should. Okay, yes, it does. And there's 10 people online, so I know that there at least some of you have been able to find it, which is good. I worry sometimes about it not being accessible. So we're gonna go ahead and get right into the questions. Mr. Tex and I have an obligation this evening. We are going to a class. We're going to a rope bondage class. And normally I would kind of let this go for as long as it needs to go for, but I'm going to be cutting it off in probably about an hour or so. So we're just going to be like boom, 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 getting through the questions. You know, if something...
cutting it off in an hour. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. He's going to be like, stream over, bye-bye. So, you know, I did make a list of 14 questions that are going to be guiding our discussion. If you want to check those out, if you want to contribute your thoughts based on those, link to them is down below in the description of this video as well. So make sure you have those open. However, we are not limited to those questions. Those are more of a guide, a way to get the conversation started. If we start talking and there's questions, if there's something that somebody, you know, has thought of that is not part of that list, we are not bound to it. I am just interested in having a way to where, you know, people have kind of a format they can follow and things that they can think about while they're reading the book. Okay, so I'm going to hop over and see what is going on. I can see that there are people who are online who are in the chat. Again, if you guys want to be part of this discussion, you need to go to the book club waiting room voice chat section rather than the text chat. That's what you need to click on. Can people hear me okay? I want to make sure the audio is fine before I leap into the discussion questions.
Yes, the audio is good. I was trying to navigate between the computer and my phone, and it didn't.
Gotcha. Okay. And for those of you who want to be part of this chat, in general, if you are doing something where you want to be part of the chat, you are going to want to mute the YouTube live stream, because otherwise you're going to get weird feedback where there's a delay, because obviously we're talking in real time and YouTube has like a 15 seconds. What am I talking about? It has like a 3 or a 5 second delay. So just be aware of that. You may be having some issues with that. But let's go ahead and get into the questions. And the first one that I like to start off with is, what were your guys' expectations of this book before you started to read it? So just based on the cover, what you know about the author, what you thought the subject was going to be on, what were your expectations of this book before you actually got into reading it? Let me just make sure I've got my notes open. Did I accidentally mute everybody? I don't know what that means.
Hopefully not.
I was gonna say that,
I accidentally muted people, I think. I don't know how I did that. Why won't it let me click and unmute people? Because I just heard you talking, Rinko, and I can see that there are other people in the chat. Let me see if I edit the channel, if that changes something. Can Sir, I don't know if he's able to look at that.
Whoa. I just almost muted everyone. Like in a different way. Okay. Voice connected.
Because it looks like the little microphone with the slash through it, that means everybody's muted, right?
Except for Rinko.
I don't know how that happened, because I don't think that happened last time.
They muted themselves. Okay, Rinko just talked, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just heard a noise. So you guys need to unmute yourselves. If you're muted,
There we go.
make sure you're unmuted. Otherwise, if you have a like a speech to, like, if it's voice activated, that's fine. I don't know if maybe is that the same symbol?
I don't think so.
That doesn't seem like it'd be the same one, because I don't.
Just unmuted herself.
Just unmuted yourself. Good, Brittany.
Yeah, I went to the squiggly circle line
Just unmuted,
and then did push to talk.
Can you hear Brittany?
Gotcha.
Can you hear Brittany?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear everybody.
Perfect.
So make sure you're not muted when you enter the chat, otherwise I can't hear you.
Yeah.
But anyways, now that we've got that figured out, I guess.
There we go.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, like, mute yourself, obviously, if you don't have anything to say, because then, you know, we don't have to hear your background.
What? Yeah, that's true.
If you're eating chips or whatever, not great for the live stream. Then
Yep.
you might have to mute you.
Anyways, also, if you guys are not comfortable with the voice chat and you don't want to talk, if you just type in the YouTube live stream, I will read out your answers, so that can be like part of this dialogue. So you don't necessarily have to have a Discord account to like be part of this conversation. And to kind of start things off, Mr. Midas says, I was expecting the book to be about the lifestyle in a general sense and an explanation of most of the common terms that one will run across in a lifestyle. Dom, top, master, serve versus sub, bottom, little brat, pets, etc. I also expected a book that went over what BDSM is not. Turns out, spoilers to answers for future questions, we didn't necessarily get that, but it was this book itself that strayed into territory that really wasn't BDSM at all, at least not in a healthy sense. And we will definitely be talking about that as our question answering progresses. So did anybody else have anything they wanted to share in terms of expectations about the book before we get into reading it? And as well, have you guys read any other BDSM 101 books before this one? And maybe share how they might have been different from this one, or how they may have shaped your expectations. Okay, I guess Okay. So, let me just pause some of the... Was it something important?
Very important. Corky just wanted to add his 2 cents on the book.
I mean, that is what happens. I got coconut yogurt.
Yeah. Spoon? Or fork?
Spoon. Okay, so I'm going to take the fact that nobody has said anything so far as an indication that nobody wants to answer this question. Which kind of puts me in a spot, guys. Like, if you guys want to be part of this, like, you guys either need to tell me you don't have something to say, or that you want to move on to another question, because otherwise I don't know what to do.
Well, maybe try asking each person in chat what their thoughts are. Because if you just sort of like throw it out there, people may be waiting for other people to talk. But if you're like, hey, Brittany, what did you think?
Yeah, I don't know, does that work? Like, if I don't want to call people out and be like, hey, answer this question on the spot.
They can leave the chat.
They can leave the chat, it's true. I guess that's true. But let me guess, I just,
And we also, like, we don't know if our technology is just deciding not to work either, so.
Can also be that. I mean, I'm still, like, logged in and everything on the, like, I'm part of the...
I can see you talk.
Okay. So in that case, I'm gonna call up Brittany, because Brittany's here. Brittany, can you hear me?
Yeah, I am here. I didn't read the book, and I'm wondering, do you think it's worth picking up?
Oh, okay. So I will definitely get into that. That's sort of something I want to end on, is like a summary of like, what did we all take away from the book? Is this something you'd recommend to new people? But we'll definitely keep that in mind, especially because there's so many BDSM 1.0 books you could recommend to somebody. Of all of the various BDSM literature that's available just on Amazon by itself. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to assume, because I know some of the people in the chat, that you guys have probably read a BDSM 101 book before. Maybe this could be your first experience, but I think generally, for me, what I expect from a BDSM 101 book, I guess this is also a mukbang now because I'm eating my coconut yogurt, is I like to have something that goes over all basic safety frameworks, talking about consent, limits, boundaries, aftercare, safe words, talking about negotiation skills, talking about how to meet people in the community, talking about how to get involved, talking about behavior that you should expect at a dungeon or a munch, how generally you should, basic BDSM etiquette, I guess, is the best way to describe it. Like, how do you talk to people in the community? How do you send somebody a message? How do you, start a conversation if you want to play with somebody? All of those kinds of things that I think, otherwise I think make people really nervous about entering the community. Obviously, I would also want to go into what does BDSM stand for, what isn't it. I like discussions in BDSM 101 books that go through different ways that you can do BDSM, so kind of like examples of different dynamics or different ways to be a top or a bottom. I think it's important in the first time you're reading a literature piece about BDSM to give as broad of a scope as possible about what BDSM can be. So maybe that means even just like mentioning, like, hey, there's this whole variety of power exchange that happens. You can have relationships without power exchange. You can do pickup play. You can do all these sorts of different role play aspects in your BDSM. You can be multiple things at the same time. All of that kind of stuff I definitely want to see in a BDSM 101 book. And I think as well it's helpful to have sections that kind of go over common types of play. So maybe a chapter on pack play, maybe something about role play, maybe something about bondage, something that kind of, again, is giving a very solid but broad framework around what BDSM is. And that's kind of what I expect from a book about. A BDSM 101 book, that would be like my ideal book if it was going to be something I wanted to recommend to a new person, somebody messaging me saying, hey, I'm new, where do I get started? Taylor, it is totally okay if you are in the Discord chat and you are too nervous to speak. Please feel free. If you do want to just type stuff out, and that is something that makes you feel more comfortable as a response, I am more than happy to read your response out loud so that way you can contribute with the conversation. But if you're too nervous, totally get it. It's not something that most people do every day for sure. Yeah, and then Vortex says, it's one of the few I've not read. Always felt like it seemed to be pretty similar to some of the other titles I own, so I passed. Yeah, definitely, like I said, there is a lot of BDSM 101 books out there, so it makes sense that it, you know, how is it different? What makes it different? Turns out, a couple things. Some good, some bad. So what I want to get into, and this is the part that, at least for me, is kind of where things start getting interesting, is what were your impressions of the author's story of how she got started in the BDSM community? Like, for somebody, maybe you're new in the community, maybe you have a lot of experiences. What was your reaction when you read about how the author was talking about how they got started in the BDSM community? And I have notes on that section, so when we start this discussion, I can definitely pull up some anecdotes that I took away from that and kind of how I reacted to them. So I'm gonna eat some yogurt. So Taylor said the author was coming from the perspective of a paid submissive. It seems like she got into a lot of kinky shenanigans through her writing career. And Mr. Midas says, I honestly didn't know what to think. My general reaction was, huh? Well, that's one way of doing it, I guess. And then Taylor followed up with, it was hard for me to tell if she actually enjoyed BDSM when she initially mentioned how she got started. Yeah, that was very much my same reaction. So for those of you who haven't read the book, in terms of how this is different from other BDSM 101 books, I think one of the most profound differences is where the author was coming from when they started BDSM and kind of their motivations to do that. The author of the book is, surprisingly enough, primarily a writer, and they more or less got started into BDSM because it was suggested that they would be a good submissive and they were hard up on money, so they took a position as a professional submission with very limited to no experience being a submissive in real life before that point, or even really with sex work before that point. And they just joined a professional dungeon in New York City, and they got started right away in just doing a bunch of stuff. And, you know, I don't want to invalidate somebody's experience or why they got started in the BDSM community, because we all get started for different reasons, and we all have different motivations for why we want to be in kink. But at no point in her discussion of like how much, you know, at no point in discussion of how she got started and her work did she ever make it sound like she actually enjoyed it. It was not a discussion of like, I started doing this work and, you know, I instantly fell in love with it. I loved being a submissive. I found like a hidden part of myself. And in that way, I think it was very different from the last book that we read, Conquer Me, because you can tell, obviously, this person is like a lifestyle submissive. They are submissive in their own nature, whereas I think the author of this book, it almost seems like they kind of stumbled into it and it wasn't even something that they felt necessarily motivated to do. They worked, I think they said like 5 hours a week at the dungeon, and you know, they weren't doing any play outside of that. They weren't part of the community outside of that. It's something that's kind of concerning for me as an educator. Like, again, this is something that makes me not want to recommend this as a book for new people who don't have any previous experience with BDSM, because this is not for people who are lifestylers or people who are in the community. Like, that is not a normal route. Like, you just don't go, I guess I'll be a professional submissive today, and then just do it, you know? Especially, you know, you don't know what your limits are. You know, how are you going to negotiate with a client about what kind of scene you're going to be having if you've never experienced what a flogger feels like? And I know that it's not literally the case. Probably it sounds like she did get some mentoring and some demonstrations from the other women who worked at this venue, switches, dominance, other submissives, and so she had an idea of what it was, but it wasn't like she'd ever been, like, you know, suspended before a client decided that was what they were going to be doing. And it's again, it's just concerning, and it's like it kind of makes it sound like anybody can be a submissive, and you know, I think there's the idea behind that is kind of disingenuous, right? Because like Mr. Tex could be a submissive, right? Like, you can't just leap into being a professional sex worker and like, or being a submissive, and then suddenly, you know, anybody can just do that, right? It's, you know, it is something inside of you, and you have to have a motivation beyond money to really enjoy doing it, I think. Not to say, again, that you can't be a professional submissive. I think just kind of having that, being an author of a BDSM 101 book, but your experience is like purely in a professional setting, or at least mostly in a professional setting. She does later on, after she ends up leaving the dungeon, she continues in different ways in the community, and she does a lot of professional work related to BDSM is what I got. Anyways, that's the story. And there are educators out there who I do recommend, like Morgan Thorne, who are both in the lifestyle and are also educators at the same time. And I think that's, you know, it's not an exclusive experience, but it kind of seemed like it was. And I think if we want to have somebody who's a good representative for BDSM as a whole, we should probably have somebody who's like genuinely enthusiastic about it and not doing it for money or because they want to have material they can write about for a book. It's very, I think Mr. Tex called it gonzo journalism. She got into it as like, you know, I'm not part of this community, but I'm going to live these experiences and like show this thing happening.
I mean, which I think is perfectly valid, but just, you don't, like Hunter S. Thompson didn't write a How to Be a Hell's Angel book.
Yeah. So what does the Emily say asks, I'm curious, as someone who hasn't read the book but has read other 101s, is BDSM so niche that written newer content that focuses on modern ways of connecting with those in the community is rare? I wouldn't say it's rare. I think there have to be books out there. I know Playing Well with Others, which is a book I've considered for our next book, is one that does go over more modern forms of communication. I think it kind of takes a while for a book to pick up speed a lot of times. Like, if you're not already somebody who's like a big educator like Lee Harrington or Melina Williams, like, unless people know you already have a book coming out, you can write an amazing book. You can write the best BDSM 101 book ever, but if nobody knows that you've published it, and it's an online book for a niche community, nobody's going to find it. So I'm sure that there have to be ones out there that are published that are like way more updated. But there are definitely books that even within like 5 years that are otherwise current, otherwise sort of in step with modern community standards, the just communication and meeting people section just gets outdated so fast. Like, you know, books that mention like Collar Me and Collar Space, which is like the MySpace of, you know, it's like the MySpace to Facebook, right? Like, it's, people transitioned onto FetLife, and not really anybody uses those websites anymore, and if they do, from my understanding, it tends to be more like professional or like escort type work rather than like genuinely meeting people, finding events, that kind of thing. So, yeah. I'm sure there are ones out there. I just haven't found them yet. And, you know, maybe in a year or two, I will find a book that's like, oh, this just came out in the last 6 months and it's amazing. It just kind of has to rise to the top. We're in scat country, as Hunter BDSM Thompson would say.
Yes, over here.
Nope. Yeah, and that was something that Taylor brought up. It made me curious to know if the professional setting involves any vetting. That being brought up, and now I'm thinking of it. Yeah, definitely. Like, again, it's like, I was actually, my main impression I took away from sort of her initial chapters was like, this sounds like a horrible dungeon. Like, this is not one I would ever want to attend. Also, record scratch, she defined a dungeon as a place where somebody went to go receive professional BDSM services. And I was like, what? I was like, holy shit, do you guys not know that things like the Citadel or like, God, what's the, or like, there's so many, of course, I'm thinking one something, that's closed now, but there's, you know, the Sanctuary, Threshold, like there are so many dungeons that are not fucking, you go there and it's a bordello. Like, and again, nothing wrong with sex work, but it's like, basically the way she described it is like, I picture a bordello. Like, you go and you get a lineup of submissive or dominant women of your choice, and you pick one and you negotiate a scene, and you go into a room of your choice and you do those acts, right? Like, but that's not what most dungeons are. Most dungeons are places where people in the community who have not hired somebody to do BDSM with them come together and they take classes, they practice, they do BDSM scenes, they socialize, they come together as a community. A dungeon is a BDSM community space, and I don't think there needs to be any other, like, factors that go into that necessarily, because, you know, somebody can have a dungeon in their basement, and maybe they have weekly parties, or maybe somebody rents a warehouse, or maybe somebody has, like, a really large storage pod or something, I don't know. Anyways, that was something that made me, I was like, especially because it was in, like, the first couple pages of the book even, and I was like, oh, we're in for an interesting ride for this book. We are in for an experience. Oh yeah, and Taylor mentioned, she only mentioned other forms of dungeons in a story from one of her friends. The one where they pretend to be having a scene and then said everybody came running with their dicks out. Yeah, that's another thing. Is like, I know the place that she's talking about in New York that her friend went to, Hellfire, I think it was. Every individual dungeon has its own flavor, and particularly every region is going to have its own flavor. And from my understanding, Hellfire is one of the older establishments in New York City. I actually don't think it's even open anymore. And especially ones that have been around for a really long time, a lot of them either started out as swingers clubs or are primarily swingers clubs to this day, and so everything is always about sex, and they don't necessarily have the same sort of protocol and way of interaction that a purely BDSM environment would have. And as well, you know, different nights have different themes to them and will draw different crowds. And a different crowd at the same dungeon can have a very, very different feel to it. And the story that friend told, I have never experienced ever in my entire life in all of my years of going to dungeons, which is not that many, but is significant enough to where I have a statistically significant amount of data points to be able to say, I don't think that's a normal experience to have at a dungeon. So, Little Princess Kitten, the book that we are reading is BDSM 101 by Reverend Jen. The link to the book is in the description below. Please continue to listen if you can to this, because we are going to be discussing whether or not we think this is a book that should be read, or is a book that we can recommend to people to read if they're getting started in the community. Taylor Rogue Kitty says, I think that the author was just really superficial and heard that all types of people go to dungeons, so she probably never frequented any outside of her employment in her life. Just my assumption. Oh yeah, and Mr. Midas, there's no way we're getting through all these questions either. It's just not going to happen. Again, they're just guiding points. Yeah, again, I think that has to do with the author's kind of lack of internal motivation for being into BDSM. Like, okay, she primarily is into this as part of her professional work. And so, you know, why would she want to go to a dungeon after working for 2 hours and doing really intense scenes, right? Like, that doesn't, you know, if I was doing intense impact play BDSM scenes 5 hours a week, I probably wouldn't want to go to a dungeon in my free time either, because my fucking butt is spent, and I do not have any extra spoons to give for more impact play at that point. So I kind of get the reason why maybe while she was doing that work, she may not have gone to another dungeon, but, you know, that was not her whole life, and that was not her whole experience in BDSM. She did eventually move on to other things, and so it was kind of interesting to feel like, you know, that people maybe don't value the dungeon experience as while still considering themselves like a lifestyler, which I found to be interesting. Yeah, as far as I can tell, New York was the author's origin point, because that's pretty much where she's talking about for most of the book. I don't know if she's had experiences anywhere else. I do not personally have experiences in New York, but New York is huge, and I know a lot of people who do, and I know a lot of the names there because they're like big East Coast names. That's kind of like what is known on the East Coast. A lot of it is based out of the New York area. So let's move on to some of the other questions. The big thing that I wanted to ask about, kind of, again, especially with sort of what we've been discussing in regards to, do we enjoy this book, do we not enjoy this book? Were there any sections of the book, were there any chapters, anything that you read that you really liked? Was there anything that the author brought up, you're like, that's an interesting point, or that's a different way of thinking about this? And I know kind of I had to fight my bias a little bit while trying to find kind of those moments in the book, because after a point I was just like, I don't necessarily agree with most of this. But was there anything that you guys like particularly actually enjoyed reading, anything that gave you maybe new thoughts around the concept of BDSM, or something that you might have thought was a really good point to bring up in a BDSM 101 book? I just closed out of my notes. I want to find a quote. So I did find the quote about her definition of a dungeon, and I'm going to read this verbatim because this is actually worse than the definition I gave that I thought was hers. And it is, a dungeon, sometimes called an S&M or fetish parlor, is a place where men and women, mostly men, pay hundreds of dollars so that dominatrices will dominate them. That is how she defines what a dungeon is within the first 10 pages of this book. And never revisits the subject again. Yeah, so Taylor Rogue Kitty says, I thought her perspective was interesting and new. I just felt like maybe she should have written a memoir rather than a BDSM 101 book. Yes, that was pretty much the conclusion that Mr. Tex and I came to as well, is like, you know, 90% of this book is personal stories anyway, or she'll like bring up a definition, right, and she'll explain the definition of like what paddling is by giving a 2-page explanation of a paddling scene she did with a client. And then she'll like actually answer the question. And so I think she was trying to write her own experience in maybe a format that didn't really work for what she was trying to do. She tried to make something educational that I think was rather maybe better served by like like an S&M feminist type book. And for those of you who haven't read that book or aren't familiar with it, the S&M Feminist by Clarice Thorne is more of a memoir type book of somebody who is a submissive in their experience coming to terms with the submissive nature given their way that they were raised, their own personal experience. And I think doing a book in a format like that would have resulted in a much better book than what this one ended up being. I will have to say though, one of the things that I did enjoy about this book is it's not even something I explicitly like. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with it. Is I think the tone is very accessible. Like, you can literally hear the New York accent in the way that this woman types. It is amazing. Like, the way that she phrases things, the way that she talks about things is so conversational and so easy, and I can see why that style of writing would appeal to a certain demographic of people interested in BDSM. I think it might be really good for somebody who, one, is not normally a very big reader, and two, is somebody who is nervous, apprehensive, somebody who kind of needs to have somebody to guide them into what BDSM is. And I think having a very, very casual, conversational tone lends itself well to that purpose of making people feel comfortable discussing this topic. And I think kind of removing the level of seriousness in some respects, it can be a good thing. I don't necessarily want every single book about BDSM to be this very serious, BDSM is dangerous and you could die doing this, like, constantly. Like, I think it's important to make that note in your book, regardless of how you say it. But having something that's a bit more friendly, a bit more like you're talking to somebody in a bar about this subject can be accessible for some people, and I would rather have a book as a jumping off point where people can go, oh, okay, now I'm more familiar with this concept, I'm more comfortable with this concept, let's go to some of the resources that she talks about, let's go read more. And that's something she does a lot of, especially in the beginning parts of this book, is she talks about, please don't use this guidebook as your only source of information, do plenty of your own research, realize you may come across some porn while researching, but that's not the same thing as what actual BDSM is, and, I think that can all be very important. So, that's kind of what I liked about it. I think the tone was maybe the strongest point of the book in terms of, like, what makes it different from other BDSM 101 books, having that sort of more personal aspect to it. Mr. Midas says she was very candid and I did enjoy her approachable style. I did raise my eyebrows a few times, which is a good thing, I guess. Yeah, like, it sounds like you can hear the New York accent through the way that she talks in this book. And I think that, that can come across as abrasive to some people, I'm sure. For some people, I think it will be very comfortable. So Harleen, other people who are asking questions, we are crunched for time today. I do not have time to answer questions that are not strictly about this book. Please come back next week at the same time, 6 p.m. Pacific time, and I will answer all those questions. I will let you guys know about books that I do recommend. I just don't want to get sidetracked because I want to make sure we can continue this discussion because we've only got about like 15 minutes left. And I know there are people who are in the book club waiting room. Does anybody who's currently in the book club waiting room want to share any thoughts?
I don't know. I don't want to share it because it's not really about the book. It's kind of something that you said that, like, sparked something that I've been through.
Oh,
so
okay.
I don't want to, I don't want to sidetrack.
No, that's okay. I know, I think that at this point, let's, like, if we want to go off and kind of talk more about things that this book brought up, let's do that. I think that's totally okay.
Well, okay, you said that, she kind of, like, explained things, but not really, she just told stories.
Yeah.
That kind of sparked, like, because, I went to a high protocol dinner, and I didn't feel like I really learned anything.
Oh, yeah, I remember you talked about that.
Yeah, the whole time she just kind of told stories. Her and her master, and then another guy just kept telling stories, and I'm like, so when are we going to learn, like, the hand gestures. I had to ask, is there a how safe word? Like,
yeah. What if something goes wrong?
Yeah. So that kind of like, I don't really like that approach when it comes to teaching, because you don't learn anything. You're just listening to stories, and you're right. It would be a better memoir.
Yeah, I think there is value in sharing stories. I think, again, it goes back to having that comfort level, right? Like, oh, okay, so there's somebody who actually does this, and this is how it actually happens, and kind of having a moment with that person personally where you're like, oh, okay, I feel a little bit more comfortable with maybe this concept for doing this for myself. But that doesn't necessarily translate well to teaching. I think my best experiences with educators in general, in books, going to conferences, taking classes, are where the storytelling is a supplement to the educational material, where you're like, hey, here's this big concept, right? And here is a story about how that concept was used. Or here's a story about a time when this was important. Or here's my first experience doing this thing that we're talking about, right? And especially I think at the beginning of a book, or at the beginning of a conversation, when you're like kind of establishing who you are, what is your personal story as an educator or as a group, having that personal way as an introduction is fine. It's when it's like you decide you want to talk about caning, and so rather than actually telling anybody what caning is, you spend 3 pages talking about a caning scene that brought you to orgasm. Like, it's not actually telling anybody about, you know, what caning might be like for them. It is telling them what your experience was, and especially for people who don't have BDSM experience, that could easily set up unrealistic expectations about what those scenes look like if you're not very explicit about, this is my experience and nobody else's. And as far as service-oriented things go, one, I don't think any of that side of BDSM was mentioned at all in this book, which for me is a huge thing. Like, that is like a giant part of the BDSM community right there. That's like not even mentioned. And so many of you guys, so many people that I know are interested in the service submission, and I think it's really disservice, again, to giving a broad scope, a broad look at the community, to not even mention anything about, like, service submission. And I mean, there's so many things I can nitpick about this book, about, like, how they talk about humiliation and how they talk about other things that I think are sort of incomplete, but, yeah, it sucks to be in an educational setting where it's like, okay, you guys just want to talk about yourselves, and then, like, I guess the rest of us are just gonna guess about what we need to do. So, Mr. Midas says she's qualified on the subject of BDSM-style sex work. I do not believe that she is qualified to speak on the subject of actual BDSM dynamics between 2 or more people. As she says early on in the book, money changes everything, and not always for the better. I think her choice of the job professionally has skewed her judgment on what it should be like privately. Definitely. I agree with that. I think it's very much, you know, because this book is not written for sex workers, and I think if this was maybe it's an educational book still, but it's framed in a way where it's like, if you are interested in talking about BDSM professionally, here's my experience doing that. That is a completely different conversation. That is a completely different thing than a book that is probably going to be read by married couples in their late 30s at night in bed together talking about BDSM and exploring their sexual fantasies. Like, that is a completely different realm, completely different demographics, and I think you should be aware of who you are writing for when you write a book, rather than only thinking about the things that you want to say. And there's like parts of the book where she mentions, like, I can't wait to be done with this chapter, which is like, why would you include that with, like, what editor? Did you have an editor? I don't understand. And especially with, like, the order of chapters and everything too, is just like, I don't believe that this book was edited. I don't believe that this book ever saw an editor. Anyways, kink shaming should not be in a BDSM 101 book, I think. I mean, I think it's worth mentioning what kink shaming is and why it's bad, and I think, you know, having a little blurb about that, and maybe like an etiquette section where you're talking about how do you interact with people in the community. But, like, you shouldn't be kink shaming kinks in your book about BDSM. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, Yeah, arguably you shouldn't be in any BDSM book, period. Yeah, that's true. That's true. You know, we got enough shame. We don't need to give it to each other. So the last kind of concept I want to talk about here really briefly, because this was sort of the this was the big one that stuck out for me. Do I have a way to search for it? Was one of the I can make flashcards with this. That's cool. A very brief glossary of terms. Should be in this section. Okay. So this is one that for me, you know, in the last book we talked about conquer me feelings. We talked about that was like the big takeaway of the book. For me, I think the thing that's going to stick in my mind is like the opposite of that, in that it's the can I have a sandwich philosophy. And I'm reading the quote verbatim from the book per my notes of how she talks about what that is. And this is in her section talking about brief definitions. Can I have a sandwich? This type of relationship is normally dubbed a total power exchange, or sometimes is simply called 24/7. Both terms refer to a relationship where the dominant or owner has complete authority and influence over the submissive's life and makes the majority of decisions. In most TPE relationships, the partners play at any time and in any place. A 24/7 lifestyle is very demanding. Oh shit, where'd it go? Did I just delete the note? What? Okay. Is very demanding and results in what my friend calls the can I just have a sandwich feeling. Never again, he exclaims, I got so tired of being the master all the time and just wanted to have a sandwich, you know. I'd be filling up her dog bowl with water and just thinking, can't I just relax and have a fucking sandwich? That is how she chooses to describe 24/7 TP relationships in her book. And I was like,
wow.
Hold the phone. Okay, I see somebody has some bias about 24/7 and MS and total power exchange relationships. Okay. Yeah, okay, but yeah, I think I heard Rinko say something, so if you have thoughts, please share them.
Flips table.
Yeah. What is going on? Yeah, it's just that section. So, go ahead.
Oh, no, yeah, go.
Okay. So when I read that section, it was just I understood so much about the author in that moment. I was like, oh, I now between that and like how she got started in kink and kind of the story she was sharing about clients, I got a very full picture of like what she kind of sees herself as in the BDSM community, right? And one, TPE and 24/7 are not the same thing. Absolutely not the same thing. You can be in a 24/7 relationship that is not total power exchange. I am in a 24/7 relationship that is not total power exchange. Most people who are in ongoing power exchange relationships, if they're living together, if they're committed partners, most of the time they're 24/7, but not also total power exchange. Those things don't have to go together. And I think as well, just a definition overall I was not super happy with, because it gives this impression that you will never actually want a 24/7 total power exchange relationship. By which I mean, people are never fulfilled by them. People want them and then need a break. That they can't actually commit to them. When it's like, I've been reading right as soon as I was done with this book, I started reading another book by Raven Caldera, who is in a 24/7 total power exchange polyamorous dynamic. And he lives and breathes MS 24/7 total power exchange. And while he does occasionally mention moments that are hard, at no point does his writing ever talk about how I wish I could stop being a master. Like, if that is a thought that you have, do not be a master. That is where I come down on this. Is all that says to me is that her friend is not equipped to be in a 24/7 total power exchange relationship. Maybe it's a 23.57 total power exchange relationship. Maybe it's 99% total power. Maybe it's 99% power exchange, but not 100%. And I think creating the idea that, like, secretly people who are in 24/7 power exchange dynamics wish they weren't really doing it at times, I think, you know, at one point it is kind of humanizing, and maybe it's more about bringing up the point that, you know, the lifestyle, you can be committed to it and still need to have a break. And I think there is an argument to have that conversation about, like, you know, you can be in a 24/7 power exchange dynamic and want a break or need a change or need a respite. But the thing is, if you're in a 24/7 total power exchange dynamic and you are in that exact situation where you are going, I just wish I could have a sandwich and not have to eat it off of her back. Don't eat it off of your back. You're in a 24/7 total power exchange dynamic. You get to make that decision as the dominant. Whether or not you decide today is the day, you know, you can go, slave, I know that normally we have an agreement that I eat sandwiches only off of your back. But today, that is not pleasing to me. Today, I will be eating at the table, and you will be the footstool underneath me. It stays in the dynamic, it stays in the moment, and as a dominant, you are not stressing yourself out doing that. And that was what really fucking got in my brain about this book, was like that concept about 24/7 total power exchange, and just like, I just wanted, just like, girl, you're trying to define an entire massive segment of the community based on one friend's experience, which is probably an experience a lot of people have, which should not be a definition that you use in a BDSM 101 book, and the only definition that you give. Point fucking blank. Yeah, so Kitty Maggie says that sounds kind of judgmental on the part of the author, and she should have gotten other experiences in regards to 24/7 as well as TPE, rather than from someone who's resentful of the past. Yeah, totally agree with that. My understanding of this from when I was reading the book was she would basically get together with a group of her 4 friends, and they would discuss the next topic that she needed to write about as a group, and then she would take their answers and use them for her definitions in her book. Which is like, again, this could have been so much better as a memoir, but then you try to be an educator about things you've never done before, and that doesn't always work out, and it results in you not being able to detect bias where there's bias, and make good decisions about what you decide to include or not. Mr. Midas says, this is sort of connected to the same thing. She missed a very large portion of lifestylers in that chapter. Oh shit, I accidentally turned off my microphone. Can people hear me? Can people hear me? I just kicked my microphone. But I think we're okay now. So anyways, Mr. Midas says, this is sort of connected to the same thing. She missed a very large portion of lifestylers going straight from casual play. Now it's scrolled up. Going from casual play, it's hardly even fair to call this a relationship, to I just want a sandwich, TPE irked me. There's so many people in the BDSM lifestyles that are way more serious than casual play, but don't have a TPE relationship. I wanted to argue out loud with the book at that point. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, found the section. 4 types of BDSM she spoke of were bedroom, DS, vanilla casual play, 24/7, and paid sessions. Yeah, basically it. So anyways, we only have a couple more minutes left, so if anybody has any last thoughts, please share them now. I'm going to be ending the stream very soon. I do not have a book picked out yet for our next book. I will either be doing a follow-up post, or I will put a comment in this video once it actually goes live, because I can't edit the link now, of what our next book is going to be, and I'll post all about it in social media, and I'll talk about it during our next live stream. I know that this was a not so great introduction to the BDSM literature, so we'll be picking hopefully a better book with the next one that we end up discussing. So. Sounds like this book is a big no, and I won't be adding it to my list of books to read. Definitely, yeah, I'm with you on that. Mr. Midas says, would I recommend this book? I may recommend certain chapters from it, like the chapter on endorphins and the chapters about various fetishes. However, as a whole, I wouldn't really have them waste their money. Yeah, definitely. I'm in complete agreement. I would not recommend this book. So if you were like, I want to have a good BDSM 101 book to read, it's not this one. You know, I took a risk with it because it had 4 stars on Amazon, and I was like, normally I only go for 5-star books, but we'll see how this one goes. And it ended up not being very great, but you know what? It's important to talk about things that don't work out as much as things that are awesome. And being able to differentiate between what is good and what's bad and things that are missing is what we should be doing. So anyways, that is it for this live stream. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you so much for reading the book that you did. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Again, I will be posting what our next book is going to be in the comment below this video, so if you're watching it later, it will be there. And I'll be posting it on all of my social media, and thanks. Alright, so turn off the microphone.
Oh, that's just, they can hear you still.
They can? I can't hear them?
Yeah, we can still hear you, yeah.
Oh, you're on my
Oh, we have so many contraptions going right now.